Yeah, there's
to begin the day with all of you for this technical session. Just to give one interesting insight, after Jharkhand got separated, so Bihar has 1.3% of scheduled tribe population. So statistically, whenever we speak, we say just 1.3. So does it matter really? Because it's 1.3 only. But when you look at the tribes and sub-tribes, there are 23 different types of tribes and sub-tribes. And we know that how sometimes culturally they are distinct, they have certain own traditions, certain practices, certain customs, which makes them very distinct. So that is the complexity and that is the comprehensiveness, which is required. The situation which we are seeing today, currently, for us to understand it very well, we have to go back to the past. That is the intention for this technical session, that we have the 4 research papers and findings here, which talks about the colonial group, and which will help us grasp some of the current issues. We have 4 presentations. We will start with Peter Gottschalk. Peter Gottschalk currently is professor in Wesleyan University, Middletown, Connecticut. His work is more on dynamics of cultural interpretation and conflict at the intersection of Muslim, Hindu, Christian and scientific traditions. Today he is presenting on a bloody and degrading superstition, coalescing Islamophobia and anti-Muslim sentiment in British India. May I also request all the participants, if they have their mobile phones on mode, if you can keep it on silent. It's very important to take a call. You can step out, still take the call and come back, so that all of us can continue. Thank you. So over to Peter now.
Thank you for coming so timely after lunch, and this will be the less interesting paper, so if you're going to nod off as you're digesting lunch, this is the one to do that with. Having just visited the ethnographic field site where I've been doing work for 22 years in the Khyber district in western Bihar, it seems to me that this research that I'm going to present on today becomes more pressing after hearing a really unrivaled level of anti-Muslim sentiment from a number of the residents of those villages in which I work, and also hearing about the anxiety about those sentiments from a number of the Muslims who live there. I have not apologized for the society's calling Mohammedanism a bloody and degrading superstition, because I did not conceive it deserved a better character, nor for its anticipating the downfall of that system of imposture, because I considered such an event to be a consummation which Christians of every description both expected and desired. So wrote John Owen, the chairman of the East India Company in 1807, in outraged reply to an earlier letter penned by a retired company servant. That letter's author, Thomas Twining, had served as district collector in Bihar's Shahabad district and drew on his experiences there to oppose British efforts to proselytize in India. He noted, "I should indeed feel myself entitled to the reproach of numerous and most respectful inhabitants of India, my personal acquaintances and friends, if I could forget or forsake them on such an occasion." Twining was one of a myriad British Indian officials who helped reshape British views of Islamic and other religious traditions. India as a whole represented the first sustained encounter of Europeans with Muslims anywhere on the globe, and many of the representations Britons crafted in this early era influenced readers far beyond the administrators of Calcutta and London to whom they reported. Bihar's role in this reshaping has been overlooked. The region's place as both among the first territories under direct British rule and also the gateway to northern India meant that Bihar played a unique and significant part in the dual reinscription and reinterpretation of Islam and Muslims in British perceptions. In the late 18th and early 19th centuries, Bihar provided a critical landscape of religious imagination as the company looked up the country, across northern Indian territories they might potentially control, and toward Delhi with its Islamically legitimated Mughal court. Despite clear evidence that diverged from received European wisdom regarding Islam and Muslims, the data collected in reports written by people like Twining, as well as the Indians who collaborated with them, could not entirely overcome pre-modern Islamophobic and anti-Muslim sentiments ingrained in the British imagination. And in many instances, British reporting reinforced these views and reinterpreted them. The negative pre-modern Christian European attitudes, reinforced by company claims, gravitated particularly around three characterizations. First, Islam's essentially violent nature. Second, its falsehood and satanic qualities. And third, its invented or corrupted nature. In considering the first point, it's important to recognize how many British published accounts, like those of many of their contemporaries and successors, essentialize not only Islam as violent, but Muslims as essentially religious. For instance, Bishop Haber, in his very popular travelogue of 1829, refers to each Muslim-led state as a, quote, Mohammedan government, religiously defined by default, even when the relationship to the state to Islamic ideology and institutions were tentative at best. In the same vein, Francis Buchanan, the most influential surveyor of company rule in Bihar, frequently coded references to Afghan, Turkish, and Mughal invasions simply as, quote, Mohammedan conquest. This erases the economic and political motivations that compelled most military campaigns, reducing them instead to an essentially religious quality. Such political claims recapitulated early modern European fixations on the purported despotism of the Ottoman Sultan. However, now Aurangzeb replaced the Sultan as the icon of despotism. The supposedly inherent religiosity of each Bihari's identity contrasted with the British identity that only included a Christian dimension, allowing for other identities and motivations as well. Twining demonstrated this in his 1807 pamphlet addressed to the company's chairman. Sir, the people of India are not a political, but a religious people. In this respect, they differ, I fear, from the inhabitants of this country. They think as much of their religion as we of our Constitution. They venerate their Shastra and Quran with as much enthusiasm as we our Magna Carta. In other words, the religiously qualified Muslims of Bihar, like Indians generally, essentially differ from their British counterparts who have successfully instantiated not simply secular institutions, but secular sentiments. Turning to the second of the three pre-modern negative portrayals, the prevalence of the notion of Islam's falsehood is testified by the English use of the word Quran as a synonym for falsehood. This was apparent in books titles such as The Al-Quran of the Barefoot Friars, which was a British Protestant criticism of the Catholic Franciscan order. Centuries later, missionary C.B. Leopold, working in Bihar, concluded, what a difference between the Quran of Muhammad and the word of the Lord. The former is calculated to lead men daily farther away from God and unite them more closely to the Prince of Darkness. Even Thomas Twining, in his impassioned defense of, quote, my personal acquaintances and friends in Bihar, by association still define them as those, quote, whose minds and doctrines are known to be most obscured by the darkness of infidelity. The charge of infidelity might appear curious, since one can only act with infidelity if one first has pledged fidelity. So when had Muslims kept fidelity, and why had they desisted? Many early modern English texts relate this theme, depicting the Prophet Muhammad as a Christian or someone well associated with Christian traditions who intentionally corrupted the true religion for his own gain. In this vein, in 1615, William Bedwell wrote the book Mohammedus Imposturi, that is, a discovery of the manifold forgeries, falsehoods, and horrible impieties of the blasphemous seducer Muhammad. To 2 decades later, Sir Walter Raleigh is purported to have written a book alleging Muhammad to have had a Jewish mother and to have allowed Satan to kindle within him a desire to be esteemed a prophet. Among the publications demonstrating the survival of these early modern views in British Bihar is an 1852 travelogue by London Missionary Society member William Byers. He explained, almost everything that Muhammad taught was drawn either from Judaism or corrupted Christianity, ill understood. Meanwhile, in the same period, Leopold quoted Christian Trilog, the senior catechist at Sigra, to describe India under Hinduism as a dark night that is now enjoying the rising sun of Jesus Christ. According to Trilog, in an intermediate moment, the moon of Mohammedanism rose, neither night nor sunlight. She gave more light than the stars, yet it was not her own, but a borrowed light. Although the light was thus increased, she could not warm the earth or make it fruitful. Like many of his peers, Leopold dedicated space in his book to explain Mohammedanism, as he called it, because he viewed his work as intelligence that sponsors needed to fund missionaries and that missionaries needed to convert Muslims. When British officials and missionaries reiterated and reinscribed pre-modern Islamophobic themes, their on-the-spot experiences made their claims seem authoritative for audiences in India, Britain, and farther abroad. However, these same experiences did shift certain paradigms and even cultivated some positive portrayals of Muslims and their religious traditions. Other new themes only deepened Islamophobia. Many officials and missionaries discovered that the views they had learned in Britain regarding Islam and Muslims, like so many other topics, did not match their experiences on the ground in Bihar. James Rennell, who in the last quarter of the 18th century established the foundational cartographic surveys of Bihar and of India in general, while on tour said, "From the accounts of the Mohammedan religion, which I read in Europe, I concluded that there were only 2 sects, but now I am convinced that there are upward to 30. Meanwhile, his observations of Muslims in India led him to a critical reflection on Anglican Christians. With these people, he's referring to Muslims here, with these people, a rich man is expected to be more religious than a poor man. If I remember right, our rich folks are the least religious of any among us. Witness their bows, nods, and other gestures during divine service. A rich man sleeps in a box, and a poor man on a bench." Similarly, Francis Buchanan noted, there are, however, many excellent precepts in the Quran. Later, Bishop Heber struggled with a British officer's admiration of Muslim devotion, even as he admitted his own appreciation. A party of Muslimans were at their evening prayers on one of the stone terraces, all as usual decent, devout, and earnest. Colonel Alexander expressed a regret that Christians fell short of in these particulars. Heber rued the fact that he had heard this claim before. British representations of Muslims in Bihar contributed to a far vaster paradigm shift in European views of religion that resulted from their overseas enterprises. The rising flood of information created by European explorers, conquerors, colonists, officials, and missionaries made the medieval Christian classification of humans untenable. This had divided all humanity into 4 categories: Christians, Jews, idolaters, and heretics. Medieval authors classified Muslims as either heretics or idolaters. The need to distinguish Muslims and Hindus for political, legal, and social purposes made their collapse into the same religious category during the imperial period, into the same category of idolater unsuitable. Although the overall negativity and overgeneralization of British views toward Muslims remained paramount during the Raj, Muslims now were disaggregated from the categories of idolaters and heretics with whom they had been classified. This dynamic proved evident from the start of company rule. In his survey report of Bihar and Patna City District, Francis Buchanan wrote, "Some Christians seem to think that the doctrine of Muhammad is preferable to that of the pagans, and perhaps it may be, in some senses, as being infinitely freer from superstition and as being somewhat less destructive of the human faculties. In his 1838 publication of Buchanan's report, Montgomery Martin reinforced this distinction and the negative characterization of idolatry when he editorialized, "If no injudicious efforts be made, the idols of paganism will gradually be broken, and the ground prepared for the pure seeds of Christian principles." Such use of the derogatory pagan and heathen labels for Hindus and the disuse gradually for Muslims prove both the persistence and the malleability of the medieval paradigm. Another strategy for distinguishing Muslims in Bihar from Hindus turned on their stereotype as bigoted and intolerant. The need to justify British rule compelled many Britons to portray the East India Company as offering a laudatory alternative to Muslim rulers and the oppressions Hindus purportedly suffered under the bigoted governance of Muslims. In 1788, cartographer James Rennell wrote, quote, It had been happier for the Indians if they had not attracted the notice of a class of men more inimical to the happiness of mankind." He characterized the ensuing invasions of Persians, Pathans, and of Mughals as, quote, the Mohammedan conquests. Buchanan's surveys commonly assume that Muslim rulers characteristically oppress non-Muslims. For instance, he speculated that some Rajputs of Bihar's Bihar district were once Persians who fled to India to escape Mohammedan fury. All the more happy then for a regime change in which, quote, the company's government has checked the Mohammedan power from injuring the Hindu worship, as Buchanan noted regarding Shahabad district. Reflecting on what he shared with fellow Europeans regarding his experiences in Bihar, missionary C.B. Leopold admitted, "During my stay in Europe, I often felt uneasy because the picture which I drew of the character of the Hindus and Mohammedans was a dark one. I have to testify that the dark places of the earth are full of the habitations of cruelty." Apparently, his ideological commitments to Christian superiority made this a necessary conclusion, yet his personal engagements with Biharis seem to have eroded his ease with it. Nevertheless, his and his fellow British missionaries' reports, along with those of many officials, generally contributed to a particular, if shifting, portrayal of Muslims. Adapting pre-modern paradigms, this portrayal served the needs of an empire in need of description and justification. Leopold went on to note, "The only redeeming quality of the Hindus is contentment. They are content with the yoke which they wear, and say that the wooden yoke of the English is easier than the iron one of Mohammedans. England, therefore, has nothing to fear from the Hindus in way of revolution. In their present state, they will not and cannot rise against the British, against the government. Not so the Mohammedans. They would gladly extirpate the English 21 times over." The pervasiveness of such attitudes helped set the stage for deepening Islamophobia and anti-Muslim sentiments among Britons, and significantly non-Muslim Indians as well, that would have enduring social and political repercussions, beginning with lopsided British claims of Muslim responsibility for the 1857 rebellion, and one suspects extending to the currently pervasive prejudices worrying very many Bihari and Indian Muslims. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Gottschalk. I request Professor Mridu Rai. She is professor at Presidency University, Kolkata. And her interests are linked to caste violence and the search for justice in colonial and post-colonial North India. Today, she is presenting on the Shudras first, Muslims after, Caste and Islam in colonial and post-colonial North India. Professor Mridu Rai.
Thank you. हम शुद्धर हैं, शुद्धर भारत के मूल निवासी हैं, बाद में मुसलमान हैं. We are Shudras. We are the indigenous people of India. We are Muslims after. These are the words of Ali Anwar addressing a large gathering in 2007 of Hindu Dalits and those his movement insistently describes as Muslim backward castes. Anwar is the founder of the Pasmanda Muslim Mahaz, inaugurated in October 1998 in Patna. According to Khalid Ansari, a member of the Patna Collective, a research activism group, Ali Anwar's words mark a vital moment of transition in Muslim politics by, quote, altering its very semantics. By privileging caste over his religious identity, Ansari argues, Ali Anwar was upturning the notions of majority and minority that are commonly invoked by the mainstream political discourse. Anwar stressed that the Pasmanda sections were a minority only when they identified themselves primarily as Muslims. But once they begin identifying themselves as Shudra, as Dalit, or Mool Nivasis, they immediately transform themselves into a majority, a Bahujan, end quote. However, Khalid Ansari's characterization of Ali Anwar's rhetoric raises some questions. Was Ali Anwar in fact privileging caste over his religious identity? In the context in which he was speaking, one of a representative politics in India that has historically sought to forge majorities out of minorities, how much was Anwar actually valorizing his caste identity in spheres other than the political? His is a rhetorical insistence on the recognition of Shudra identity, but in conjunction with and in the context of the assertion of a Muslim one. In no way is there a denial of the latter. This is not a proud owning of Shudra belonging. On the contrary, it is an implicit rejection of a social category that even the Pasmanda revile as debasing. The assertion of their Shudra or Dalit origins and identity stands as an accusation against those Ashraf Muslims who, through their marginalizing social and political practices, place them in that category. Such rhetoric is intended to unsettle hierarchies within Muslim communities, not to act as a secessionist rallying call. Those who discount such assertions of caste identity most vociferously are members of the Ashraf, whose politics today depend crucially on projecting the unity of a Muslim political constituency. Are the politics of the Pasmanda Muslim Mahaz comparable to the anti-caste politics of Dalit radicals in Maharashtra, whose activism Anupama Rao has so richly documented in her book, The Caste Question? As she tells us, beginning in the late 19th century, members of the Mahar caste, quote, led a regional movement which for the first time produced a political response to the association of untouchability with Hinduism. They did not demand Hindu inclusion, but instead conceived the untouchable as a unique political subject, as non-Hindu and Dalit, end quote. Here I believe the Pasmanda Mahaz's politics are different in a vital respect. In the end, they do demand inclusion in the Muslim community. Not surprisingly, Ashraf Muslims have reacted by dismissing movements such as the Pasmanda Mahaz as being founded on misguided sentiments. Most commonly, the argument is that even if Muslims have come to be hierarchically ranked, these ranks cannot be considered divisions of caste because, of course, Islam does not sanction such divisions. So the denial of caste among Muslims really hinges primarily on one principal point, namely that since caste derives from religion, a questionable assertion, and since their religion does not permit it, caste can have no valid existence among Muslims, as if doctrinal invalidity somehow miraculously negates sociological reality. Others before the Pasmanda Mahaz had also struggled with the dilemma created by the theoretical adherence to the principle of equality in Islam and the ambient social reality of a hierarchical division along lines of caste. Muhammad Iqbal, poet and philosopher, excoriated in two impassioned poems, Shikwa and Jawab-e-Shikwa, the dissolute condition of Muslims as he found it in the early 20th century in India. The Shikwa was a lament addressed to Allah for having deserted the faithful despite their devotions. By contrast, the Jawab-e-Shikwa is Iqbal's rendering of Allah's reply. It takes the form of censuring Indian Muslims for forsaking Islam. Caste or Zat among Muslims figures in some measure in both poems. In Shikwa, Iqbal proclaims its absence as a mark of a staunch and devoted Muslim. Thus he writes that even in the heat of battle, when the call to worship rang out, men would, dropping weapons and facing Mecca, kiss the ground in prayer. And in the moment of devotion, in the space of worship, there was no difference between sultan and slave, rich and poor, when they joined together as brothers in united reverence to God. Dismissing the assertion that Muslims lived as equals, in the Jawab-e-Shikwa, Allah accuses them of having divided themselves into hostile sects and groups. The burden of sustaining the faith had come to rest entirely on the poor. They alone kept worship alive in mosques. They alone undertook the hardship of fasting. Indeed, it is the poor who are held up as protectors not just of the faith, but also of the honor of the elite. Any claim for consideration from Allah by the privileged among Muslims were dismissed in these powerful lines. Yun to Sayyid bhi ho, Mirza bhi ho, Afghan bhi ho, tum sabhi kuch ho, batao tum Musalman bhi ho. You proclaim yourself to be Sayyid and Mughal and Pathan too. You are all of these. Tell me, are you Muslim too? Some observers have seen these verses as Iqbal's reprimand of the elite, whom he held responsible for the inequalities in his community. However, the picture is not quite so clear. Iqbal had certainly leveled his criticism at Ashraf Muslims for their neglect of the faith. And here he also names some of the guilty parties, the Sayyids, Mughals, and Pathans, who embody self-exalted identities that many have seen as the equivalent of Hindu-dominant castes among Muslims. However, even as the Ashraf are in fact, subordinated Muslims appear only boxed generically as the Gharib. This last is a capacious term, carrying a range of meanings in Urdu usage. Besides signifying economic poverty, Gharib can also allude to a laudable stance of humility or even to a sense of helplessness. So we don't know that Iqbal was speaking of any of the Atlaf or of the Razal. The omission in naming any of the large number of subordinated zats that had historically constituted the lower rungs of the Muslim community makes doubtful the contention that Iqbal's focus was on combating caste consciousness, as some have argued. Instead, by directing his criticism solely at the Ashraf, he was urging them to own once more their responsibility as leaders among the believers to renew the vitality of all the Muslim community. They were the agents in his poems. This was not a proclamation of the equality of all Muslims, even if the principle was not explicitly denied. Nor did he deny their fraternity. Indeed, fraternity as a cherished value and principle need not negate hierarchy. Most Indians would have been familiar with the respect owed an older sibling by a younger. But what does seem to underlie, perhaps not consciously, his verses is a generally shared awareness among Muslims that while equality was an ideal to aspire for, its manifestation in living experience was not expected. A recognition of the many slips between doctrinal affirmations and actual behavior had long suffused other kinds of written records, such as those produced in the arenas of governance. Yet there was nothing in Ziauddin Badmi's Fatah-e-Jahandari or Abul Fazl's Ain-e-Akbari for lower caste Muslims to tap into during their early 20th century battles for respectability or equality within Islam. Nor did the akhlaq literature, lauded by historians such as Muzaffar Alam and Richard Eaton as marking the secularity of Muslim governance, offer any reprieve from hierarchy. These texts, each in their own way, naturalized divisions in society, which had to be respected in the interest of political stability. Their greatest interest seems to have been in reconciling the principles of Islam with the reality of human society solely in the domain of logical reasoning. They point to a degree of acceptance of inequality as inherent in society and in the polity, predicated as it was on the unequal distribution of essential natures, characteristics, and abilities among human beings. It has been a long journey to revealing caste inequality among Muslims, veiled as that social reality has been. Universal acceptance is still far off. But beginning in the early 20th century, one segment of the Muslim community had taken the lead in exposing the oppressions, debasements, and insults that had been heaped on them by their self-proclaimed social superiors. They were predominantly Muslims of the community, known variously as Jalahas, Noor-Baf, Momin Ansaris. The Momin Conference was first inaugurated in Bengal in 1911, but gained momentum from the mid-1920s in North India. The leaders of the Momin Conference argued that they had a proud past as independent and upright artisans producing a basic necessity of life, cloth, but that new technology and capitalism brought in by British imperialism had caused their ruin. The object of the organization was to unite all Ansaris and to uplift the reconsolidated community through a revival of the weaving industry. Its resolute anti-hierarchical stance pitted the Momin Conference against the Muslim League in UP and Bihar. The leaders of the conference held that the League was controlled and manned chiefly by such Muslims as belonged to the rich section or the superior group. The Ansaris, through the 19th century, came to be consolidated, or at least saw themselves as such, into a single community having suffered a singular scale of deprivation under colonial rule. And yet, how much of a consolidated community did they really represent? The idea that equality was a goal, but not necessarily one to be found in society, was reflected even by the Ajlaf Ansaris. If the annual activities of the All India Momin Conference are anything to go by, their discussions, especially the annual presidential addresses, demonstrate a striking degree of Ashrafization. I will not use that word again. Most of the presidents were well-educated men, lawyers, lecturers in colleges and universities, owners of successful businesses, dissatisfied at being kept on the lower margin of Muslim society despite their material achievements. Most of them focused considerable attention in their speeches on the Quran and the Hadith, the high tradition of Islam, to argue against their continued social downgrading. Eventually, however, nationalism destroyed any distinct identity as Momins the Ansaris may have argued for, when it subsumed them within the theoretical unity of Indians as equal citizens. Their specificity remained only as Muslims who were nationalists and therefore opposed to the Muslim League. The Momin leader from Bihar, Abdul Qayyum Ansari's presidential speech to the All India Momin Conference in 1948 deliberately asks his audience to erase their separate identities. He reminds them of new times and new conditions when every Muslim must work for the nation. It is surprising, therefore, that Abdul Qayyum remains such a celebrated figure in the Pasmanda Muslim Mehez, founded a full half a century later. In calling for equality as citizens of the nation, Abdul Qayyum Ansari dismantled its history of protest as denigrated Muslims, the movement that he had once represented, no matter how conservatively. Yet in a large meeting held on 23rd July 2005, in the name of the Arakshan Bachao Sammelan, the Pasmanda Muslim Mehez and the Bihar Momin Welfare Society stood shoulder to shoulder as co-organizers. In line with the search for unity among backward castes across the religious divide, two of the Hindu OBC heavyweights of Bihar politics, Lalu Prasad Yadav and Nitish Kumar, were also invited. However, for all the acknowledgement of the Momin Conference's contribution to the cause of those who now call themselves Pasmanda, the two are rather different kettles of fish. There are a few striking differences that some may find superficial, but I think were purposive and a reflection of changing times and requirements. For one, the journal founded by Ali Anwar and his colleagues, the Pasmanda Awaz, was published in Hindustani, written in the Devanagari script, not the chaste, heavily Persianized Urdu in which the leaders of the movement conference made themselves heard, and the Perso-Arabic script in which they were read. The preference for the colloquial not only bespeaks a different audience to which the Pasmanda movement was reaching out, but also articulates a shift in its goals. If anything, the Pasmanda Mahaz travels grounds not remotely opened by the movement conference. In the inaugural issue of the Pasmanda Awaz in 2005, the Ali Anwar-led movement defined its goals as striving for equality and secularism. It is in this sense, Anwar says, that Islam is called a revolutionary religion in that it brought the message of equality and fraternity. These very traits are now on the decline. It is so that we might live and practice secularism in its true sense that we began our journey with the proclamation of a struggle for equality. It is important to note that the secularism referred to here is ambiguously defined. The reference to Islam is prominently present in Ali Anwar's writing, but equally important, of course, is the reminder of caste-based differences. In order to struggle for equality, the inequality within religious community must first be addressed. This is still very much a Muslim struggle. Is there actually any room here for non-Muslim Dalits? This is a question that must be asked given the words from Ali Anwar my paper opened with, that they do not belong to the community of Islam gives non-Muslim Dalits no normative room for arguing for inequality. I conclude by suggesting that the Pasmanda Muslim Mahaz's politics is also about religion and not just an owning of their caste identities. In seeking to build bridges with other lower caste groups, what is elided is that these other non-Muslim Shudras and Nivasis cannot make the same claims to justice through equality. That requires one to be Muslim first and Shudras after. Thank you.
Now I invite Professor I. K. Choudhary. Professor I. K. Choudhary is currently the Dean of Social Sciences in Ranchi University, and his area of interest is in regional history, particularly that of Jharkhand. And today he is presenting on Zamindars and service Jagirs, a study of Chhotanagpur Raj in Medieval Jharkhand. Professor Choudhary.
As already referred by the chairperson, the topic is Zamindar and the service Jagirs, a study of Chhotanagpur Raj in Medieval Jharkhand, and the period is 1585 to 1832. 1585 is the year when Akbar conquered this area for the first time, and the Raja of Chhotanagpur became the Malguzar of Bihar state under the Mughal government, the then Mughal government. And 1831 is a landmark in the history of Jharkhand because of coal revolution, coal rebellion. It is also generally called as the first war of independence in tribal perspective in the history of Jharkhand. Friends, all of us know by and large that in absence of any substantial written sources up to the medieval period, we have no other way than to depend on the oral tradition and mythical accounts which the tribes and others of this area have kept preserved through the ages. Jharkhand, however, emerged as a distinct historical region during the Mughal period when Akbar's general conquered this area. Hence, we get some useful information about the Nagman Shudras in Persian literature. This is the beginning point. This is the beginning point from where the area of Jharkhand, particularly Chhotanagpur, gets references in Persian literature. So the isolation of Jharkhand area, not entire isolation of Chhotanagpur area, not Jharkhand. Jharkhand and South Africa was very much in the mainstream of Persian literature. So, particularly I mean here only Chhotanagpur. We have, however, huge amount of colonial records of this area, as the present study is based on oral tradition, Persian sources, archival sources, as well as some of the valuable secondary sources available to us. Friends, in 1787, J. Grant, the chief Saristadar of East India Company, described the dominions of Raja of Chhotanagpur as an elevated region of which formed part of Suba of Bihar, containing 18,000 square miles, though in proportion to other parts of Bihar, a very inconsiderable value. In the late 1820s, W. Hamilton described the large Zamindari of Chhotanagpur as extensive hilly tract, much covered with the forest, thinly intersected with the village, and in 1841, Dumont described Chhotanagpur as a Zamindari of 95 miles long and 85 miles broad, bounded by Ramgarh proper and Palamu and North and Gangpur area of the Sindhu, and so on. Before I will come directly to the evolution of Zamindari and particularly the Zamindari system, I would like to take some events in historical perspective, how the state and socio-political formation took place among the Adivasis, particularly among the Mundas and Uraons of Chhotanagpur. The earliest evidence of socio-political formation is reflected in Pahara Panchayat system. In modern political terms, it was an autonomous loose confederation of indigenous people. One may argue that in the early years of the Munda and Urao occupation of Chhotanagpur, there was no individual ownership of land. The tribesmen cleared their village lands under the leadership of their headman or Munda and village priest Pahan. It appears that due to inter-village disputes, the Munda realized the necessity of greater organization, which is known as Parha. The Parha wielded power and influence over the people and became overall leader of the tribal villages. The rule by Pahan is a special characteristic of the Munda. He was the real social leader or head or patriarch of the village family. His right to the leadership or to regulate the social, cultural, economic, religious and political system of the village is derived from being the original founder of new community or the oldest representative or the original founder of the village. So the village by batches came to be grouped under party with the strongest and the most influential among the headmen of village, that is Manki and Para chief. The remaining village headmen were allegiance to and elected the Manki. Military services was the primary and in the beginning, perhaps the sole condition. Each village headman of the party would make clerical presents to the Manki of certain quantities of mahua, flower of basya, herua, barni, cho, and other similar things. This seems to be a stage of semi-feudal system which developed among the primitive tribes. The first Raja is said to have been the son of great snake god, that is Fanmukitra and Fanmukitra. Thus the formation of a state of formidable nature, like Hinduized state of mainstream system, outsiders were gradually introduced to whom lands were assigned for military services. The socio-political mobility led to the origin of land grants to Brahmanas sometime after 10th to 12th century. From about the 8th century AD, the frequency of land grants increased. The period from 1000 to 1200 has been described as the heyday of land grants in northern and eastern India. In the Garhwals of Uttar Pradesh have the feudatory estate as far as Abe Palamu in Chhotanagpur, such as the Kharvallas of Jabla, who were themselves sufficiently well off making the grants in Chhotanagpur. Thus, land grants also emerged in the early medieval period in Chhotanagpur. Now, thus, with the coming of the Mughals, you know, a specific change took place. The Turk-Chand Afghans made their presence in Jharkhand. Jharkhand was a center of political activities of Sher Shah. He won battles in Jharkhand against the Mughals. The Mughal rule changed the socio-political structure of Jharkhand, and the first Mughal invasion took place in 1585. And The defeat of Nagwansi ruler and the heads of Muslim ruler from Delhi led to the payment of tribute of 600 in 1628. This is the landmark in the history of Chhotanagpur and Jharkhand, as I told you earlier, that this is the year after what the Chhotanagpur area became Grand Amli, that the chief was independent chief, who used to pay annual Nazarana, annual tax, and by all practical purpose, the chief was independent. So the more fundamental change took, however, the related to rights of a land took place in the Mughal period. It was in the 16th and the 7th century that the Chhotanagpur, known as Kolkata, attracted the attention of the Muslim ruler of North India. So the outsiders whom the Maharajas had brought into the country had to be paid for their services. Thus the system of service Jagirs, grants, was introduced and the beneficiaries were called Jagirdars or men of holding service Jagir. These grants were written out in documents. These Jagirdars believed that the Maharaja possessed absolute right over the whole Chhotanagpur, and that in making his service grants, he had transferred his absolute proprietary rights to the Jagirdars. In this connection, S.C. Rai argues this is not true. The draftsmen and the scribes of these documents, as indeed all literate people of the Maharaja's court, were men from Bihar, and these men necessarily used the set of forms of such documents they had known in their own country. It appears that the word Zamindar was used in a very broad sense in documents in the historical works in Persian. And Raja and Parti Zamindars were often referred to Zamindar. For example, in Persian literature in the Mughal era, we find that the Durjan Sal was Zamindar, whereas the Durjan Sal and other Rajas were known as Maharajas or Rajas. So locally they were known as Rajas and Maharajas, whereas in the Persian chronicles they were often described as Zamindars. And it is not only applicable to Jharkhand area only. So, Zamindars. The Zamindars in the Mughal Empire may be classified in the three broad categories: the autonomous chieftains, the immediate Zamindars, the primary Zamindars. A chieftain might exercise primary rights over some lands and intermediary rights over the others, while simultaneously enjoying sovereign or state powers over his dominion. The Nagwansi Raja, by and large, enjoyed this position. On his release from the return to Chhotanagpur in 1628, the chief began to put his new ideas of royalty into practice. The Hinduized nature of Nagwansi estate increased military machineries. They were to be nominated their services. Thus the Maharaja's feudal dues in number of villages came to be assigned to these new officers. Thus the system of service Jagirs was introduced, and the beneficiaries were called Jagirdars and men holding service Jagirs. The result was that the outsiders began to get lands and influence and to override the rights the original inhabitants, causing much discontent. These events introduced a change in the traditional way of life, Mundas and Gurau. The traditional way of life of the Mundas and Gurau. The breaking down of the tribal mode of production related to the loss of DNA, rights of land, and redistributing the system according to DNA. These rights now passed into the hands of professionals outside the lineage and often outside the region. The situation has been described as a superimposition. So, you know, by and large, the system of service Jagirs was introduced, and in this background, the Britishers entered in this area in 1771. With the introduction of the permanent settlement, the system of Zamindari and Zamindari system was legalized. Through the permanent settlement, it was not the authority of the British government to impose taxes on the Chhotanagpur, but they decided to implement the permanent settlement, and after 1793, when they recognized the authority and power of the Zamindars, automatically these service Jagirs and the land tenures were legalized. This was a blunder on part of the British authority. So these land grounds, finally resulted in so many land tenures. In connection with the service Jagirs, you also find references of Ijara tenures, Ammonite tenures. Well, there are so many tenures, Kharpados tenures, Devotar tenures, Kusbrit tenures, Hinduized tenures, and tenure after tenure which emerged during the British period. So we find large number of religious tenures also, that is K Choudhary, Devotar, Brahmotar, and etc. All these tenures and all these service Jagirs, created a lot of problems for the original sectors or the original land tenures of this area. Thus, now we conclude my paper. Thus, the evolution of Zamindari and Jagirdars appears to a very complex system of socio-economic life prevalent in Chhotanagpur region of Jharkhand. The study suggests that the socio-political formation, which was primarily processed by the Mundas and Urao, subsequently paved the way for Nagvanshi Raj headed by the Munda chief. They later on followed the policy of Hinduization. Thus, Rajput Raj emerged as a formidable Rajputized state before the invasion of Mughals. This patronized a small size of land holdings, the middleman. The middleman between the peasants and the Rajas, the service Jagirdars finally introduced disruptive elements in the tribal society. Awababs, Rukumats were levied by the Jagirdars. However, the British took a strong stand against the Awabs in the year 1793. Service Jagirs also patronized forced labor, Bhet. Thus, the land system of Chhotanagpur, which has been fundamentally changed through non-tribal immigration from the joint ownership to hierarchy, a structured individual ownership system, encouraged the dissatisfaction at several states. The pernicious effect of the regulation bomb Cornwallis system, law correcting, land regulation, land sales, and cultivating claims were felt, and the privileges of the Raja and Jagir holders remained undisturbed. The Mankis and the Munda, the Mahto and the Pahan, all original landholders have now over their heads non-tribal service holders and service Jagirdars of various kinds. Bengal government, which was responsible for the ruin of peasantry in Chhotanagpur, did nothing till the end of the 19th century for their welfare. The Jagirdars introduced the idea of rent in cash, which was opposed by the Mundas and Gurram. As a result, Maratha brought in more soldiers from outside. These military mercenaries had also to be paid for their services. They too had received Jagirs. Thus, the system of service Jagirs have led tenure change the socio-economic structure of tribal people. Further, in the early years of 19th century, the Maharajah and his Jagirdars got heavily indebted to outside merchants, money lenders, and other creditors. Unable to pay them in cash, they friend away villages to them and assigned their land revenue to them. These Tikadars succeeded in reducing a large number of the Munda and Uram families of present proprietors almost into the miserable subs by renting them and outsiding them from the land holdings. The tribals were forced to consider the intervention of the British rulers and landlords as an affront to the autonomy of their economy, culture, and social organization. They had no other choice than to fight openly for the protection of their traditional rights, and therefore so many revolt after revolt took place. Tamar revolt, 1782-1820, Gold insurrection, 1819-1820, Gold rebellion, 1820-1821, the Great Gold insurrection, 1831-1832, and so on. We see in the region of Jharkhand, and all this is because of the introduction of the Zamindari and Degrading system and the British system of taxation, which we find in the region of Jharkhand.
Thank you, Professor Choudhary. And now we have Professor Rajesh Kumar. He is Associate Professor in University of Delhi. I invite him. His interest is in social and political history of colonial and post-colonial Bihar. Today he is presenting on Swami Sahajanand Saraswati, Bihar Provincial Kisan Sabha, and the politics of caste. Professor Kumar.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon. My paper, Swami Sahajanand Saraswati, the Bihar Provincial Kisan Sabha, and the politics of caste, centers around multifaceted personality, Swami Sahajanand Saraswati, who led one of the most powerful peasant movements of his period. Now, what is fascinating is the trajectory of his activism, from a sannyasi to a person engaged with the efforts towards the uplift of Bhumihar community, and to a person fighting for the cause of the peasantry. Now, what is also interesting is his negotiations with the national and regional politics, not properly trained or grounded in any of the isms. Based on his experiences, he developed his own understanding of the political agrarian situations. This explains the continuous evolution in Sahajanand in respect to his policy and programs relating to the peasant movement. Now, this paper broadly focuses to the four major themes, and overlapping may be noticed in terms of terminology, in terms of the chronology of the events. However, these four, broadly, these are the first actually is the early life. The second, his engagement with the national and regional politics. The third will be covering this aspect of caste dimension of agrarian issues and its linkages with the politics of the period. And finally, the representative politics and the ascendancy of the backward caste in the mainstream politics. By highlighting some of the main characteristics of the socio-political life of Bihar, I will be mainly focusing on my arguments. In 1889, Mridu Rai was born in a Jujotia Brahmin family in the village Deva, district Gazipur. Being disconnected from their original homeland, that is Bundelkhand, his ancestors had developed dining and matrimonial relationship with the Bhumihar Brahmins of the neighboring areas. In 1907, he became a sannyasi and was named Sahajanand. In course of time, he came to believe, which was reinforced by his readings of Dharma Shastra, that without taking up the dand, that is becoming the dandi, one cannot become a true sannyasi. In 1911, he became a dandi sannyasi and came to be known as Swami Sahajanand Saraswati. Interestingly, even a sannyasi could not transcend the influence of caste, as only a Brahmin sannyasi could take a dand, which was not allowed to sannyasis belonging to any other varna. His participation in the Balia conference of Bhumihar Brahman Sabha in 1914 proved to be a turning point. Consequent upon his experience at Balia conference, he decided to give up the life of detachment and became determined to do something for the uplift of a community of high status cultured Brahman, that is to restore what he termed a sense of self-respect to the Bhumihar community. He published several books to establish the Bhumihars were Brahmins and they can also perform Purohiti. Being influenced by the political situations in the country, he met Gandhi, who was at Patna during this time in enlisting support for his forthcoming non-cooperation movement that was in 1920, and had a long discussion with Gandhi, which was around several issues ranging from the dharma of a sannyasi to the political situation. Subsequently, he attended the Nagpur session of the Congress and got associated with the national movement. Meanwhile, serving the cause of the Bhumihars, he launched the Purohiti Andolan in 1924 and got it legitimized by resolution of Bhumihar Brahman Sabha at Patna 1926. Significantly, in his efforts, he had to face the opposition of the landed aristocracy of Bhumihar community, which was influenced more by the political considerations than any socio-cultural aspect. However, he had the support of the educated younger generations of the community who were influenced by Sahajanand's appeal for self-respect and self-realization, self-respect and self-reliance, and realized that their aspirations were being represented by Sahajanand. In 1927, Sahajanand set up Sri Sitaram Ashram at Bihta, Patna, to teach Sanskrit to the children of Bhumihars. Eventually, this ashram became a center of peasant activities, where peasants belonging to Yadav and other castes as well approached Sahajanand to redress their grievances, that is, their exploitation at the hands of the Zamindars and their officials. This is how he got associated with the issues of the peasantry. Subsequently, he set up West Patna Kisan Sabha in March 1928 and eventually the Bihar Provincial Kisan Sabha. From now onwards, I will be using this term BPKS, that will be for Bihar Provincial Kisan Sabha. Bihar Provincial Kisan Sabha at Sonpur, November 1929. Sahajanand's experiences during the civil disobedience movement and the 1934 earthquake and the subsequent meeting with Gandhi He was disillusioned with Gandhi and parted ways with Gandhi. This was almost 14 years of association with Gandhi. He got attracted towards socialist philosophy and the influence of socialist leaders, as well as realizing the growing intensity of the demands for the abolition of Zamindari. The BPKS adopted the resolution for the abolition of Zamindari at Hajipur session in 1936. Meanwhile, significant developments were taking place in the social sphere of the Bihar. Like caste associations were formed, and what actually was the impact, that during 1920s and 30s, agrarian issues were being formalized. Question of Begar, Abwab, etc. was the perennial source of tension. Moreover, the demands by some of the lower castes to improve their social status, especially the issue of donning of Janev, that is the sacred trade, became a source of discontent between the upper caste and the backward caste, resulting in social tension, often expressed through exchange of violent actions from both sides. And incidents of Lakochak 1925 is very significant in this context. Significantly, when the backward caste sought the intervention of the state agencies like police and judiciary, they were unsuccessful in the redress of what they considered to be corporate wrong done to them by the upper caste. The caste dimension of the agrarian society was more explicit in matters of abwabs, which varied according to one's position in In 1933, Gaya Kisan Inquiry Committee, which was set up by Bihar Provincial Kisan Sabha, in its report enlisted 44 types of abwabs, which were basically along the lines of caste. I will give a few examples, like the Gwalas, Yadavs, were required to provide milk, curd, ghee, queries to provide vegetables, chamas to provide shoes, etc., either free of cost or privileged rates to the Zamindars. It is significant to note in the report that wherever the agricultural laborers belonging to the upper caste were found, they were forced to stop their work. They were treated leniently in matters of Begar and Abwab, where it was considered to be the eternal duty of the caste, placed at the lower level of social hierarchy, to give Abwabs and to do Begar, which they could not dare to refuse. The backward caste came to realize that improvement in the social hierarchy would provide them with more opportunities and resources, as well as possibility of betterment of their economic conditions. A sense of self-confidence began to develop, and they realized that only through their organized efforts they could improve their socio-economic conditions. Subsequently, in 1933, the Triveni Sangh was formed at Kargahar block, Shahbaz district, by Chaudhary J.N.P. Mehta, Sardar Jagdev Singh Yadav, Dr. Shivpujan Prasad Singh. It was organized at the district levels by Kushwaha Kshatriya Mahasabha, Yadav Kshatriya Sabha, and Kurmi Kshatriya Sabha. In 1935, the Triveni Sangh was organized at the provincial level, and Dasu Singh became its president. Notwithstanding these developments, while analyzing the social base of the BPKS and its leadership, the dominance of the middle peasants, rich and well-to-do farmers, and substantial tenants, mostly belonging to the upper caste, becomes quite clear. And there was hardly any place for the backward caste and the Dalits, who represented the larger section of the non-occupancy tenants and the agricultural laborers. Therefore, the emergence of peasants as a class could not take place, and basically it resulted in a limited class formation among rich peasants, mostly belonging to the upper caste. This was largely because of the understanding of Shahjahan and the BPKS about the peasants as a class, which was quite vague in the beginning. In 1929, Shahjahan and the West Patna Kisan Sabha defined a peasant as anyone whose primary source of livelihood was agriculture. Hence, the early phase of Shahjahan's peasant politics was marked by class collaboration and attempt towards resolving the dispute between the Zamindars and peasants through compromise and conciliation. Consequently, the issues pertaining to non-occupancy tenants and agrarian laborers, mostly belonging to the backward caste and Dalits, did not get adequate attention. It was only under the influence of the socialist leaders, and particularly when its program, which demanded, in clear terms, transfer of power to producing masses, redistribution of land to peasants, that Shahjahan and BPKS developed a new understanding. Now, a peasant is now known as the Grihastha, a person who earns his livelihood by cultivation and agriculture, be he a petty landlord, rayat, or the laborers working for the wages for the ploughing field. Subsequently, the resolution regarding abolition of Zamindari was adopted. In the 1940s, in his categorization of peasants, included the landless laborers in the category of peasants, as he realized that through the process of depeasantization, the poor peasants and the agrarian laborers come so close that no demarcation line can be drawn. In 1944, Shahjahan even admitted that the Kisan Sabha was unable to get all peasants together, and that really the middle and big cultivators were for the most part with the Kisan Sabha, and they are using the Kisan Sabha for the benefit and gain. This evolutionary process in the understanding of the category of peasants and their problems explains the limitations of Shahjahan and the BPKs in addressing the issue of non-occupancy tenants and agrarian laborers, mostly belonging to the backward caste and Dalits. The composition of Bihar agrarian society was such that the exclusion of these categories prevented any sustained and effective movements under the leadership of BPKs. The elections for the Bihar Legislative Assembly were held in January 1937, and the Congress secured an absolute majority in Bihar, largely because of the support of the peasants. Significantly, the Congress ministry, through its agrarian legislation, largely based on the Congress Zamindar agreement, without consulting the leaders of the Kisan, also did not address the agrarian issues concerning occupancy rights, abovs, begars, etc. This resulted in the second phase of the Bakas struggle of 1937-39, which were marked by a new consciousness and determination among the backward caste, especially in Gaya and Saran districts. The mobilization along the lines of caste is quite noticeable in these struggles, mainly for reclaiming the lost land as well as against the excesses of Zamindars. Contradictions, however, also appears in terms of this mobilization along the lines of caste, and no fixed patterns emerge out. For example, in Majiaba, that is the Gaya district, the tenants belonging to the Brahman caste started their Bakast struggle, which were joined by the tenants of Yadavs and Pueri castes from the neighboring regions. Significantly, in this movement, the success was basically largely the result of the exemplary courage shown by the women. Whereas in the Amwari, that is Saran district, the struggle was started by the upper caste against a Vaishya Zamindar, Ashraf Sahib. These movements become significant in our analysis of the politics of caste and the peasant movements. While in the 1920s, attempts by the backward caste peasants to resist the illegal exactions were met with stiff resistance by the upper caste Zamindars, during the Bakas struggle of 1937-39, it were the upper caste Zamindars who actually looked for compromise and even accepted the compromise reached between the Zamindar and the peasants, and had to restore the Bakas lands to the original tenants. The introduction of representative politics created further space for the articulation of grievances by the backward caste and the Dalits. The increasing measures of political reforms and the gradual devolution of legislative and executive powers to the elected representatives intensified competition for power among various interest groups. The increased mobilization along the lines of caste and the backward caste also made their concerted efforts to ensure greater representation in these representative bodies. The Triveni Sangh played an important role in this context. Although the caste sabhas or associations of respective backward castes were in existence prior to the Triveni Sangh, it was the culmination of the realization among the backward caste that it was only through their organized and collective efforts they could contest the upper caste dominance in the political power structure. The leaders of the Triveni Sangh realized that the political empower would enable them to do something for the socio-economic uplift of the community. During the assembly elections of 1937, when the Congress did not accommodate some of the Triveni Sangh's candidates to contest the election as the Congress candidate, they contested the elections from the platforms of the Triveni Sangh. Although they lost the elections, but the participation and intensive campaigns by the leaders of the Triveni Sangh generated hopes and confidence among the backward caste about their electoral prospects. During the district board elections of 1939, further lowering down of the franchise qualification benefited the backward caste, as numerically they far outnumbered the upper caste. Consequently, a large number of candidates belonging to the backward caste got elected in different district boards, especially in Patna and Shahabad districts, and the backward caste established themselves as an emerging political force to reckon with in the politics of Bihar. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Kumar. I think we have 15 minutes for question and answer. And I would request that please introduce yourself, identify the presenter, and then ask your question. So we'll have one round, and then time permitting, we'll go for the second round. We'll take 3 questions now. Can you provide the microphone to him? Can you take this one?
This was an excellent presentation from one of the speakers on the panel. Professor Rai, I have a question. I'm curious with regards to the term Paswan.
Sorry to interject. Can you introduce yourself?
I'm Pranav Prakash from University of Iowa. So this question, I have a couple of questions with three of the panelists. Professor Rai, I'm interested in the word Paswan and whether it has any relationship with Paswan. I'm just curious about that. And the second and more important question that I have in mind is, it seems it was evident from your presentation that at different points in history, the Paswan community we were talking about tried to align itself with the Bahujan community. And I'm wondering if downplaying of Muslim identity or emphasizing Muslim identity was an issue in the relationship that would have established between other members of the community. Professor K Choudhary, this is with regards to the distribution of land. So I'm interested in knowing the land documents that were being produced both during the Mughal period and later on. What kind of documents are these? Are these copper plates? Are these written on paper? What is the nature of the material nature of the document that they have to establish that the land belonged to someone? And second, during the colonial period, was there a Namdar commission like you had in Deccan and Maharashtra, that they would the colonial administrators would establish a Namdar commission to verify the validity of these documents? And the third question is for Professor Kumar. I'm interested in knowing what were the personal attitudes and sentiments of Sahajanand towards Shudras and lower caste? Like, how did he interact with them on a daily basis? Was his toilet cleaned by an untouchable? And if there is an evidence of how he was interacting with people from lower caste and Shudras at a personal level, I would be interested in knowing that. Thank you.
Take one more. Okay.
I'm from JNU. This is a question for Professor Rai. I was just wondering if you can elaborate a little more on how did Pasmanda community imagine itself, and if there is any movement to reinterpret the history, like the Dalit movement has reinterpreted history, symbols, ideas, and questioning the entire what they call Brahminical notion of history. If there is any movement which predates Women Conference. And in the present political scenario, I mean, how do you see the political reconfiguration, especially in the UP context when the votes have already been divided? What are the kinds of reconfiguration of vote which is possible in this present scenario?
Hi, I'm Sagar. My question is for Sagar from General University. My question is for Rajesh sir. Sahajanand Saraswati also spent some time in Fiji, which is mentioned in his autobiography. And I was wondering if his take on the indentured labor system, which he makes there, because he himself went there as an indentured labor, did it have some kind of a connection with his Kisan Sabha days? Because Kisan Sabha ultimately was taken over by the left section within Congress. And was there a labor peasant interface that he was formulating at some level?
So I request Professor Mridu Rai to respond to Pranav Prakash and then to Bihar.
Thank you both for your questions. First of all, to Pasmanda. I don't remember which other word you mentioned. Paswan. No, Pasmanda is a Persian word meaning those left behind. Pasmanda. Yeah? So those who actually come from behind the throne, literally, is how you figure that, or visualize it in some ways. In terms of downplaying Muslim identity, well, I mean, first of all, I don't think this effort at striking alliances with other backward castes, not just Bahujan. I mean, Khalid Ansari uses Bahujan, but he really literally means a majority. The majority. He's translating it literally. It's not been a part of the politics of Pasmanda Muslims. First of all, very few of them call themselves by a term that actually sort of advertises openly their quote-unquote backwardness. But in terms of Ali Anwar and his politics and a few other politicians like him, downplaying the Muslim part is indeed important, which is why he talks of himself as a Shudra and a Mool Nivasi. What I'm suggesting is that, you know, the trouble with this is that it doesn't give us a sense of how this plays out in realms outside of politics. You know, I mean, it's not possible, if you, especially because they talk about the Mormon Conference as their great inspiration. The Mormon Conference, in many ways, where it turns political really in the 1940s. The British don't even know who they are. We discovered them in the 1940s. We discovered them because suddenly the Congress and the Muslim League are busy wooing them for or against the Pakistan demand. But the Mormon Conference is much more in the nature of a Sabha movement, self-respect association. It's not overtly political until the 40s. But it doesn't, therefore, it doesn't give up its Muslimness. The battle is really within, against the Ashraf, within the community largely called Muslims. But they also sort of participate in the process of setting themselves off from other, even less well-off Muslims. What Ali Anwar and the Pasmanda movement are doing would not have been possible before the mandalization of politics. The unpacking, first of all, of the middle caste, and then the further unpacking of lower castes. Because if you look at his Maswat Ki Jang, he talks about groups that would be called Dalit Muslims, Lal Begis, Halal Khors, etc. So it's very different politics. But in the domain outside of politics, it cannot work because it is a contest to sort of show in the face of the Ashraf that they are breaching the doctrines of Islam by practicing inequality. You cannot ask for equality and social justice through equality via Islam without actually emphasizing your Muslimness. So I had a very brief example of what contradicts what he says in this speech when he's writing in Pasmanda Awaz, and he says, well, you know, this is why Islam is revolutionary. He can't escape the bind within which he's caught, and he's looking for justice through equality. Does that make sense? I mean, what is the solution for non-Muslims? Then should they convert to Islam? Obviously, he's not asking for that. Does that make sense? So, much more complicated than I can sort of try and answer at this point. You know, a lot of this writing associated or at least picked up by the Pasmanda Mahaz is very recent. Dalit radical writers have tackled issues of gender and Dalitness, etc., for much, much longer. But there are interesting bits of writing. First of all, by Ali Anwar himself. He doesn't actually engage with history, only insofar as he does turn around and say, well, Muslim presence and the history of Muslim presence is not a history of Muslim presence. It's an Ashraf presence. So they do go back and try and sort of rewrite this. They love castigating people like Ziauddin Mahir. He's a favorite, and he's the easiest to castigate because he divides Muslim society according to the most caste-like categories. Masood Alam Falahi, for instance, so I don't think he's Pasmanda. He sounds from his writings as a member of the Ashraf, has also gone back. He discovers with shock, I don't know where he was living until then, but very recently he discovers with shock that there is Zaat amongst Muslims. So he goes back and he reads, Beheshti Favor, he rereads his Thanvi, etc. And I think there is an attempt to, but it's discarding at this moment, rather than sort of appropriating Pasmanda Muslim writers or figures in history. Much less, it's much less prolific than has been the case for Dalit writers, non-Muslim Dalit writers. Okay? And sorry, UP elections, well, I mean, as my friend Khalid Ansari says, Why wouldn't the Muslims vote for the BJP? The BSP and the Congress only fielded Ashraf candidates. Who? I mean, he may have in the hopes, but there was that huge disappointment that the BSP had, fielded sheikhs and sayyids. What happened to the Pasmanda? So I don't think they're a political party yet, but there is this feeling and demands that may coalesce into that kind of position.
I will take the second question first. So far as I remember, Sahajanand, Saraswati and Fiji in terms of indentured labor, I would recollect it right now. Is it not Baba Ramchandra? So far as my memory goes, it is Baba Ramchandra, but maybe I don't remember, because even in the autobiography, I can't recollect right now. Is there any mention of that Fiji or whatever? Right?
Because I attended a talk at CSDS where a girl had presented. No, it is Baba Ramchandra.
Baba Ramchandra, he went there, he came back. That is another story. That hardly any native level used to had got this opportunity to come back, and then he came back. So that is another story. And this, so far as this influence of communist or whatever. Look, as I have tried to make my points there, that it was a continuous evolutionary process. Sometimes with Gandhi, then moving towards socialist, then coming to this completely going for this class struggle. So from class harmony to class struggle, and then joins this forward bloc also, and then during the last days, completely away from this. So not any specific ism actually can be attributed with Sahajanand Saraswati. Right, and so that actually is my take on your question. Now, so far as this Sahajanand Saraswati and his opinion regarding this question of untouchability and all, so very interesting things has been even written by him, even in his autobiography, Mera Jeevan Sangharsh, when this question has been asked to him, that why actually you are not doing something for these untouchables. So first he addressed these questions of untouchables and related with the question of hygiene. It is hygiene or something like that, that I do these type of things, that particular caste should do this, particular caste should do that. Then why don't you do something for the uplift of this community? So even in the very beginning actually, he had made this point very clearly, that not as a caste leader he actually is doing something for the Bhumihar community. His entry into that efforts actually was accidental. It was not a planned one. He actually was influenced, under the influence of one of his sannyasi friend, Swami Punanand, if I remember correctly. He attended that. And actually, this association, because he belonged to a Jujotia Brahmin family, and then having this relationship with the this Bhumihar Brahmin family, so he could not understand this mindset of Bhumihar. So why they are so depressed? Why, if their claims of Brahmins are not being recognized by the Brahmin community? So let me do something for that. Then that actually is the idea behind this involvement in this politics of caste or whatever, as particular to the Bhumihar community. And so far as his backward caste and Dalits is concerned, towards somewhere around 1941 and then 1944, he openly admits it. Rather towards this 1924, when this Sitaram Ashram things came up, and Kuwaiti Andolan, that conflict actually I have mentioned here. So when the Zamindars actually stopped these donations to the caste Sabha, he actually had come out with saying that these caste associations and the donations from the Zamindars are basically the device by the rich to control these organizations for their own benefit. So he is very, very clear. He is very clear about this issue of caste. But in terms of caste-class dynamics, that takes some time. So it is somewhere around 1940s that we actually find that his take on this issue of caste and something like that start taking place. So far as personal relationship or personal contact with this community is concerned, the first incidents actually in Masora, the peasants somewhere around Masora, that is 30 kilometers from Beta. So peasants belonging to Masora that actually approached them, and the Yadavas were largely among them. So as such, there is no specific things relating to that.
Now I request Professor Choudhary.
Yes, there was one question whether there is land documents available. Yes, yes. You know, if you want to know as a researcher what is the material regarding the land tenures, those are now at present available in the name of village notes and all that in Commissioner's office or in District Commissioner's office. And as far as the commission is concerned, you know, tribes were the pre-literate people. Till the Mughal period, they had no literary sources. When the Britishers came introduced permanent settlement, then the revolt after revolt took place, you know. And the revolt was taking place only because of the erosion of their original land rights. Therefore, the East India Company then established, and after, particularly the Crown government, established some of the commissions. First, for example, in 1861, Lokesh Nath Sahi was interested to assess the Bhumiyari villages of the Munda and Urao villages, Bhumiyari. And of course, as many as 400 plus villages were surveyed, and Bhumiyari villages were demarcated, and rest were not. And then only on the basis of this survey, you know, I think the first Land Revenue Act was introduced in 1869. Then it was in 79. Then the Birsa movement took place. Then the landmark CNT Act and the CNT Act. So all these were the form of commission. The inquiry was set up. The officers were authorized to demark the Kutkati lands, the Bhumiyari lands, the Mahajans lands, the Rajas lands, and then the original authority of the tribals and others were tried to be restored by these commissions or by these authorized British officers. So in this way, we have land records available in the records of Dhaka.
I think we can take a couple of more questions to him.
My question is from Dr. Rajesh Kumar.
Can you identify yourself, sir?
Myself is Dr. Ragan Kishore, College of Commerce, Kolkata, Department of Political Science. Do you find any significant role of Dr. Swami Sajanand Saraswati in the role in the Champaran movement of Gandhi in Bihar in 1970? Do you find?
Specifically Champaran, there is absolutely no association with Sajanand Saraswati with Champaran. 1900 and incidents somewhere around 1918 to 1919, he started showing interest in these political developments, and those interests was primarily through the readings of the newspapers like Patliputra and Express, something around something like that. Now, before that, he actually had this knowledge of something like World War is going on. So these type of informations we do get. But so far as Champaran is concerned, Swami Sajanand Saraswati, I'm sorry, he is not involved. Oh, sorry.
My question is, first I am Chhotanagpur, I am research fellow at Center. So my question is Mridu, because on concluding points, he made one statement that required to be Muslim first and then Shudra like later. You made in conclusion. So ma'am, as I read Satish Sabharwal work on the making of Muslim historically, so what he said that the Asraf and Adal differences is as sharp as the Brahmin or other castes among Muslims. So after electoral politics were introduced, then this Muslimness comes first, and this Asraf and Azlaf were sidelined. So in asserting the Pasmanda, when they started asserting this Pasmanda identity, and Muslim Shudra claiming Shudra first and claiming Muslim later, then I think this is okay, and this doesn't require that they claim first as a Muslim. They are Shudra and they are still in social life, they are treated as a Shudra. They are treated as a Shudra, they are treated as a Julaha, they are treated as Bhangi. They are never in social life, in religious life also somewhere in Bihar you will find India Untouched documentary. They were never allowed to pray prayer in same mass. So I don't think this need to they claim first Shudra, because the all Pasmanda and all India Backward Muslim Morcha movement were to recognize Dalit status for the Dalit Muslim, SC status for Dalit Muslim. This was the first movement started by All India Backward Muslim Morcha by ADRI. Then later they got divided and this Pasmanda Muslim Mahas came in picture. So I really found this